Thank you very much and welcome everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Denise Keele. Dr. Keele is the director of the Michigan Climate Action Network, whose mission is to connect and amplify individuals, communities, and organizations confronting the climate crisis in Michigan. They support them in advancing equitable climate solutions with the urgency the science demands for the environment and all of us that live in it. I've known Dr. Keele for more than 20 years, since our days as graduate students together at the State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry in Syracuse. It's a little school with a big name, and we typically call it just SUNY ESF. Denise has worked tirelessly and passionately for the 2 decades to educate students and community members about environmental sustainability and to build climate resilient communities. She's been a professor at Western Michigan University for more than 10 years and is now, like I said, the director of the MyCan network. Dr. Keele has been a lifelong advocate for the environment and natural resource sustainability. She grew up in a farm in Iowa, earned bachelor's and master's degrees from the University of Tennessee in forestry and resource management, and like I said, a doctorate in environmental politics from SUNY ESF in Syracuse. Please welcome Dr. Keele.
So I really want to talk to you about this empowering idea today and this whole network and how we really work and try to work together. And one thing that I should tell you that we're going through right now as we are developing this presentation, we're doing strategic planning. So we're also kind of reshaping that vision and mission that Eric just shared with everyone and thinking about where we're going to go next. So as you follow along, be prepared. I'm going to ask you some questions at the end about how you think we should be moving forward. So the Michigan Climate Action Network began in 2015, and it really was the first organization in Michigan that decided, you know what, we need to be able to say climate change out loud and proud. And we were the first organization to focus solely on climate change. And since then, we've built up a network of about 40,000 individuals and 80 different affiliates. And so the way the structure of the network works is that we build upon all of those great local community actions. So before at Western Michigan University, I'm still in Kalamazoo. I was also leading the Kalamazoo Climate Crisis Coalition. For all the folks in Grand Rapids, you also have a Grand Rapids Climate Coalition. So all of those types of organizations, they're their own networks, right? Kalamazoo has like 40 affiliates and Grand Rapids, I think, has like 70, right? So think about how those local ecosystems of people and organizations then build up in sort of a hierarchical model. Then all those folks become members of the Michigan Climate Action Network. And that's really how we meet our mission, especially that first part about connecting and amplifying all the different folks that are confronting the climate crisis. And then the second prong of the work is going to be how we support those folks in doing that work and in leading and empowering everyone to become really fierce advocates for climate change in their own hometowns. So that first prong of our mission, again, is to really build and mobilize a stronger climate movement in Michigan and to make climate a top issue in the state. And a couple of the ways that we do this strategy, that we implement this, we founded a climate summit. And I think the first one was actually held at Grand Valley State University about 4 years ago. And we've gone, of course, digital since then. We hope to return in 2023 in Southeast Michigan. But this summit is really the annual convening of all the local and state climate champions in all sorts of sectors. As you saw, our membership is sometimes businesses, those community organizations, all sorts of individuals. It runs the whole spectrum. And the summit is the place where those folks can get together to discuss their successes, their challenges, and what they're working on. And that helps us align our campaigns. And we try to be very accessible. So a lot of the pictures there on the right, we also have been going around, especially since I took over in just June, pretty new on the job here, going around to all those different locations and meeting with people in person to understand understand what they're doing in their communities and how the network can best serve and meet our own mission. We also have the largest digital platform in the state on environment and climate issues. Right now, we reach about 100,000 people a month with our climate message through Facebook, Instagram, and I really hope you all go check out our social media specialist on TikTok. She is taking it by storm. Every month I ask her for the analytics and we've grown by another 100%. And when you start at zero, okay, like that seems like a lot, but she is just doing a fantastic job on making climate more accessible, especially to young people. Our audience is, of course, the very young sometimes, and then folks about my age and older, and almost very predominantly women. So we'll talk about that audience a little bit more and our need to diversify that in just a minute. Where I want to go next is about why it's important, why we would have this kind of mission, why it's so important to build and mobilize this movement and to make climate a top priority. So I'm going to switch a little bit and talk about some of the things from my policy background about why we need a network like this. And the big reason is that public opinion is a major factor that explains policy change. If you want to have good climate policies, we need public support for those things. And that's what this network is all about. And what I've got on this slide, again, the professor and me cannot resist showing you the slide, the environmental decade. It was really because of the first Earth Day in 1970 and over 10 million people working together in the United States in a social movement to build that kind of public opinion and political pressure that enabled the environmental decade, in which we passed the Clean Air Act, National Environmental Policy Act, Clean Water Act, toxic and waste controls. And I leave those vote tallies on there for you to reminisce about a time before partisanship in this world. Of course, these things were also passed without the extreme partisanship that we have today. But I truly believe that these social movements are the antidote to some of the elitism and some of the minority opinions that you see really controlling our political agenda right now. If we can build that strong movement, we can do this again. We did this once. We have an opportunity to build this and make it happen again. And this time we can fix some of the things that we didn't do well in that movement, things like equity and justice that weren't as prevalent in the 1970s. We have an opportunity now to be more inclusive and build on a very successful movement. And I think we're in one of those movements, and I hope you'll join us and make that true. When we look at public opinion, a source that I like to go to is the Yale School for Climate Change Communication and George Mason. They've been doing surveys and studies over a very long time. And the data here is, yes, we talk about polarization, but the cool thing they've done is identified the 6 global warming Americas. And the scale there is, the first one's from April of 2013, and then 2018, and then 2020, and then most recently in 2021. And what they do is ask a series of survey questions and put folks on a scale of alarmed, concerned, cautious, disengaged, doubtful, and dismissive. And that scale goes from the highest belief in global warming, you're the most concerned, you're the most motivated to take action, to the least. And we can see a few trends in all of this data over time. Taking from 2013 to the most recent in 2021, the alarmed now outnumber the dismissive by 3 to 1. The alarmed have doubled in those 8 years, from about 16% in 2013 to 33% in 2021. As a political scientist, this is a plurality, right? 6 in 10 Americans are now either alarmed or concerned. What Yale does really well, and would be a whole other talk, but I suggest you look at their resources, is they then have communication strategies for each one of these segments of the audience. And so if we think about moving that cautious group, what they most want to know is that it's the cool thing to do. No pun intended. We are talking about global warming, but they need to know that the social cues are there. The cautious folks are waiting to know that this is going to become the mainstream, that we're normalizing taking climate action. And so they're a group that I think about a lot, because boy, if we could move those other 17% over into alarmed and concerned, now you're talking about just not even a plurality, but huge majorities, again, much like the original environmental movement, with so many Americans worried about clean air and clean water. So public opinion matters, and this is how it's changed just a little bit over time. So if 7 out of 10 people that you meet in any room are concerned or alarmed, then why doesn't it feel that way to most of us? Because I bet you're out there thinking that looks great, but I don't feel that. Maybe you do in your community, but I talk to a lot of folks across the state who say, gosh, I still get pushback. I still get like all sorts of disruptions when I try to bring up climate change. And I think it doesn't feel that way because of the next couple of slides that I'm going to show you. Because we aren't talking about it. We're not talking about climate change. Even though most of us are now alarmed and concerned, very few of us, only 33% is the line on the bottom in the green, are often or occasionally, meaning like once a week, actually even just talking about climate change with their family and friends. 2/3 of us are never talking about it. And it's really because a lot because of this preconception that you're in the minority, that when you talk about this, it's going to be an argument and no one's going to agree with you. And no one likes to be out there on their own, especially, again, that cautious group of folks who are looking to take those social cues from what's acceptable dinner table conversation. So we need to be just talking about climate change much, much more. On those social norms, and again, all of this is from the Yale Climate Change Communication and George Mason Center, those norms for behavior, on the top is the importance to family and friends, meaning how much social pressure do I feel to take actions that I perceive as reducing global warming? And less than half of us. On the bottom, same story. How much do I actually see my friends and family taking actions to reduce global warming? Around 37 to 40%. So we're not seeing those folks talking about it or taking those actions, which is leading us to think that we're not in this plurality that we truly are in with attitudes and public opinion. So we're not translating that right into the salience of our time. Now, there's a lot going on in this one. Stay with me. At the top left there is that scale again: alarmed, concerned, cautious, disengaged, doubtful to dismissive. And this is a compilation of all of Yale's data from 2017 to 2021. So the numbers are just a little different. But in that category, what they wanted to know is, okay, how many folks are actually taking action then? And when they pulled out right below that just the alarmed, of the 24% of the overall population over those 5 years that would say they're alarmed, very few of them are taking action. If you're alarmed, you should be the most motivated, the most concerned, like out there, right? 20% are inactive. Only 34% are active. Most are willing to take action. When we put these numbers together, it means that only about 8% of the American population is both alarmed and active. So that gives me a big reason why we're not seeing the changes in things like policies and behaviors that we want to see, and why, again, the Michigan Climate Action Network is focused on this network and building out this capacity. Over on the right is they asked folks, the participating now, definitely would, I probably would, or not sure. This is still within that alarmed category. So the active, we know, are actually doing things. The willing say they probably would. And so I always feel like, well, that's why we're here. Come join us, right? If you would do something, please find your local or state or wherever you are in the world, please find someone else. No one should do this work alone. You can find someone to do this work with. What's really interesting is the inactive alarmed. So many of them here are saying, I'm not even sure that I would take action. And here's where we do need a little bit more work from the social science perspective of what are some of these barriers? Why are folks saying they're not even sure they would take action? I'm sure a lot of it has to do with it's overwhelming. And a lot of it is also, I don't know what to do. We hear things like, I don't know how to talk about it all the time, or I don't know what the action would be. Again, I think that there are some barriers here that a network could probably address, and we should be addressing those types of things. It's really no different. We just are in strategic planning again, and we did a member survey this summer, and our own network has the same results as the Yale National Survey. So this is MyCan members who were surveyed over the summer. About 124 answered this survey of those 40,000 people, right? So a pretty low response rate, which tells you something already. But we asked, how involved have have you or your organization been in our activities? And we see that almost 66% are either not involved or barely involved. So very similar to the national trends, with only 5 to 6% of the folks that are even in our network being actively involved. And so coming in as a new director of this organization, that tells me that we have a lot of work to do in matching the audience here to skills and things that they can do. And so that's sort of where I'm going to try to head with this network. And that's where I want your ideas. Be thinking. Remember, I'm going to ask you questions at the end. So be thinking, why is this? And what do you think I can do or this organizations can do to increase that kind of participation? So what we call this in social science, what we've been talking about here, we call it the attitude behavior gap. We've got record numbers of folks, global warming is happening, are worried about it, yet fewer than half are perceiving that social norm. Only about a third are talking about it regularly, and fewer than 8% of us are actively participating in a campaign. It's going to take a lot more of those actions to meet the kind of moment that we had in the 1970s with the environmental decade. So I tend to view this, again, here are the numbers from 2021, thinking about that 33% plus 25% plus maybe some of those cautious folks. I don't see climate change as a problem of individual belief. This is a failure of effective civic engagement and collective action. And where I spend my time is galvanizing the folks who do get it. They obviously want to do something, most of them, or they're not sure. There are barriers there that it's now on us to decide what those barriers are and to overcome them. And in 2015, Bill McKibben came to Western Michigan University's campus. We had him speak in 2015. Think about it, that's the time when this organization was started. No one was saying climate. And all of my work was about how to convince deniers and how we were going to talk to people that didn't already believe. And I'll never forget on the big stage, someone asked Bill McKibben, the founder of 350.org, probably one of the most influential climate organizations in the world, asked him, well, how do you talk to deniers? What's your strategy? And his answer stunned me at the time. He said, I don't. And he just kind of stopped. And it was like, okay, that deserves a follow-up, Bill. And he was like, well, I'm not going to convince those folks. And he was already seeing this trend starting to change that I'm talking to you about now. He said, look, I don't have time to talk to the folks who are dismissive, that are never going to accept the science. I don't put my time and energy there anymore. I put my time and energy in all the folks who are doing something. And that kind of stuck with me. And that's sort of my philosophy about how to do this work. And the numbers are bearing that out. So our second big prong, all right, so here are these people who are doing stuff. My CAN's job is to support that local work to advance those equitable solutions. If we want to galvanize all of those alarmed and concerned folks, how can we do that? And here's just some fun ways that we've been engaging in that. And so on the left screen, we did a report last spring that showed all the different communities in Michigan that are already leading on climate. These are communities that have set renewable energy goals, that have climate action plans, that are taking really bold, innovative action. There are about 17 different communities that sort of made the map, so to speak. And I can tell you, in traveling the state over the last 3 or 4 months, it's way more than that, right? Like, there are folks doing things, they might not still be calling it climate. There are leaders and what I call climate champions. And there are even hidden climate champions all over all over our state. And so really, it's now the job of the Michigan Climate Action Network to share those stories out. What does the Marquette Area Task Force on Climate, what have they learned? And how can that then be replicable and shareable to the folks that are in Oakland County Climate Collaborative? And again, the folks that are in my own hometown of the Kalamazoo Climate Crisis Coalition, or again, where many of you are, the Grand Rapids Climate Collective. It's really interesting that so many folks have decided a coalition is the type of structure they would like, and to build this social hierarchy up. And again, we have so much that we can learn and share from each other. And that's how I think we can galvanize this movement and support that local work at the same time. A lot of this work went into the state of Michigan does now have a climate action plan. It's called the My Healthy Climate Plan. And this report was actually cited in the My Healthy Climate Plan as examples of the types of things that are going on in communities that we can build upon. And the Michigan Climate Action Network played a big role in getting comments about the plan, making sure it was going to be bold enough and moving us forward enough. The other local solution that we work on, MyCAN, Michigan Climate Action Network, really became a huge player in shutting down Line 5, which is one of the big pipelines, oil pipelines run by Enbridge in our state that goes under the Straits of Mackinac. And it's really been an issue that has allowed that galvanizing force and a growth of the movement to shut down Line 5. I'm very proud of the work that MyCAN does here. We are a formal intervener in the legal cases against Enbridge on all of this work. And so one of our roles is to get to play that piece of expert witnesses and driving the climate conversation. And our organization was successful in getting the Michigan Public Service Commission to include climate as one of their factors and the data in making their decisions about Enbridge ever. So for the first time ever, finally, a state agency looked at climate data in order to make their decision about Enbridge's tunnel. Those cases are ongoing, so you can ask me questions about them, but I will have to give you my lawyer answer and be very, very short on some of those. But that's just another example. We've sort of thought about it as stopping fossil fuel infrastructure, and Line 5 is just the start of that. And we can build upon that campaign across the state as well. So some things that are in that Michigan Healthy Climate Plan, we really see one of our roles as being able to implement this plan now and working with those communities to reach the goals of the state. And some of the things around transportation, if you look on the right, where does Michigan's greenhouse gases even come from? We have transportation is really tied for electricity production. So the motor state lives on here in Michigan, if you know us for that particular thing. And so I'll just highlight a couple of these strategies, because I just think it's important for everyone to see the kind of societal transformation that this plan seeks and that these communities are already doing, and that MyCAN is trying to connect and support. So we're trying to get 2 million electric vehicles on the Michigan roads by 2030 to have some incentive programs for that. Of course, the Michigan's own fleet needs to transfer over to 100% zero emission. Some of the fun things that I get to do in my new job, the state police organization got to test the Mach 4, right? So they get to test the fancy fun vehicles that and see, hey, are these going to be usable for what we need in the police and fire sectors of our economy? So there's some fun things that we get to do as well. I get to do speed tests for vehicles and things like that. It's pretty cool. And the last one, you know, what we hear a lot from folks is, okay, cars are still sort of the old way, right? Like, it's great we will have electric cars. What about true mobility? How are we going to invest in public transit, walkability, how the infrastructure for folks to live within those communities? So this is a big one that we're working very hard with lots of communities, lots of innovative solutions here. The other big category there, that energy production, that's electricity and including some of the industry in there. So kind of hitting the two biggest categories of greenhouse gases in Michigan. We have to change over our energy source, right? We all know that it's fossil fuel combustion is the primary driver. Of course, there's deforestation that's driving climate change. So we need to make sure that we are doing holistic statewide energy planning. One of the things that the Michigan Climate Action Network does is then hold the utilities accountable. So most of you that live in the state are familiar with either Consumers Energy or Detroit Edison. There are other companies. UPCO is in the Upper Peninsula. All of those have to develop what's called an integrated resource plan. And it's kind of our job to hold them accountable to the state's goals of a 50% reduction by 2030. We need to make sure that happens. It was fantastic to see in the Grand Rapids area, the Campbell coal plant was finally shut down just this last year. That is because of the work and the public support for this plan and the things folks have been doing around the state. The last one is where we spend a lot of our time thinking about where can we actually put solar that we're going to need in these communities. And I kind of highlight that last point because the state still has kind of a vision of almost all renewable energy coming through the utilities. And we think there's going to be some different solutions for local communities in true solar, community solar that the communities own themselves. And so the siting question is really big about who owns the power. And we can use multiple definitions of power in that particular way. The other thing, and this, key into the themes of this year's conference, is to have this be a just transition. This is in the Michigan Healthy Climate Plan that, again, we're really focused on making sure now that it's been passed recently is going to be implemented. And there are some provisions in there. Justice 40 is one that is modeled after the federal government, which has 40% of all state funding that's invested in climate-related infrastructure is supposed to serve low-income or traditionally marginalized communities. And so, again, organizations in the nonprofit world, it's sort of our job to track that, to hold folks accountable, to make sure that the communities who are impacted the most and who need it the most are getting that support. The plan also puts out an idea for a seed fund to support the economic transition challenges of towns that are losing their power plants, right? These are jobs. We want to make sure we're including that in our definition of justice and that true transition from mining and coal and those factories to renewable energy, which means we need to make job training. Just today, the governor of Michigan, Governor Whitmer, released a jobs report. Michigan is really soaring now on these renewable energy jobs to be able to create all those wind powers and all those solar panels that we're going to need. This is about job creation as well. And I kind of put, well, what does all that mean to MyCan? Because that's kind of what the Michigan Healthy Climate Plan says. How we implement that work, how we think about it, is to really center Black, Indigenous, people of color in communities, and then that very, very local scale in thinking about what makes sense. We know that communities know where they should site their solar. We know that the folks who live in the community know where the blighted areas are. They know where the rich areas are. They know their communities, and we should be listening to them, is how we, our fundamental approach. And again, we want to ensure that that green economy means equitable access to green jobs, that we're putting in those replacements for factories to move out with the coal and move in with renewable energy, and widening the focus of climate change to mirror the diverse communities within the state. I often get in conversations where folks really just want to talk about agriculture and rural Michigan up north and how that might work. And there's a whole vein of folks who talk about energy independence if you talk to the white rural folks in the state. And then there's a totally different situation when we get to Southeast Michigan or Detroit or in some of our cities that are thinking about flooding and thinking about resilient urban decarbonization of buildings. And so, but those folks are also talking about energy democracy, right? How do I, as a person or a community, have a greater voice in the energy choices that are available to me? And it's the Michigan Climate Action Network's position that those two ends and those diverse communities within the state are actually sometimes talking about similar things. And if we see it through this justice lens, that gives us a real opportunity to identify where, again, the most impacted are, whether that be job loss or climate impacts. And I would just point you to a couple organizations, the Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition and the Michigan Alliance for Justice and Climate. Those, we are proud to be sit at that table and be members of both of those coalitions. And they are really leading the work on the justice front. And I encourage everyone to follow, like, read about them, get their newsletters, because it's really just fantastic work. So a little bit more on our survey results to return to what is Michigan Climate Action Network doing and where are we headed? We really then in our survey also asked, well, why do you join the Michigan Climate Action Network? And the number one reason was to have this trusted information about what's going on. So, we're kind of trying to keep our pulse on what's going on in these communities, what's going on at the state level, what are the models, what are the solutions out there? So it was nice to see that kind of come through, but folks are also looking to us to gain some knowledge and skills, to get to know that diversity across the state. And we can do a lot more there. We have a lot of capacity to follow through with that. And we asked folks, well, what kinds of skills or trainings would you be interested if we were attended? And I was so pleased, given what I just talked about no one talking about climate change, or maybe this is one of the barriers. Folks are asking us that they do need help. They don't quite know how to effectively talk about climate change just in general. And then the rest of the categories, they're talking about it to your elected officials, organizing others in your community. Those are things that I think across the state and all of those communities that are already leading, we could all learn a lot from each other and could be developing some real tools and trainings about how to actually talk about this in our state and how to move all of this forward. So those are some things that we are thinking about doing. And I would be remiss if I didn't put up our climate voter action plan, which of course in Michigan right now, we are looking up to an election in, oh gosh, less than around 30 days. I should know that off the top of my head, and I don't. But one thing, of course, we have to do, we're a nonpartisan 501c3, so we don't endorse candidates. We don't get into electoral politics at all, but we absolutely want to make sure that folks know the resources that are available to them to look up candidates and to make that choice, to have that public opinion, not just say that we care about climate. Maybe you're taking actions and your community is, but we also have to vote in climate champions so that we can really get this work done. So my team, you get to hear from me today, and I just want to say everything that you're going to, tell us that we could or should be doing. Remember that we're a very small team as well. So I know we present very large, like with this giant organization, but there's actually like 3.5 of us because some of these people aren't even full time, right? So there's me at the bottom, and at the top, Jamie Simmons is our engagement director. If you're working in the state of Michigan, you're probably going to see her or me sometime. Serena is our TikTok goddess. She's our social media specialist at about a quarter time, and Colleen Ate is our communication specialist. Ashley Scholstick, we are currently housed at the Groundwork Center for Resilient Communities in Traverse City, and she helps us navigate that relationship, and they're our home so that I don't have to do paperwork and human resources and all that kind of stuff. So I told you I was going to ask you some questions and try to kind of use our time together as much as you want to think through, where could the Michigan Climate Action Network go? I hope you'll join us. But here are the questions that we're thinking about. How are we going to grow a more inclusive network? How do we really strengthen this climate movement? Maybe some of you out there have heard about the 3.5% rule, that you need at least 3.5% of the population in order to even start to have the kind of impact that the environmental movement of the 1970s did. Well, if Michigan's population is about 10 million, and on a good day, we have 50,000 people in our network, we're not even close, right? So we need to build this network or some cumulative portion of it, right? Think about all those member groups or the other environmental organizations. We got to get to 350,000 people in this state. That is my goal for this organization in the next 5 years. So I hope you will join me. And I'm open to how we do that and how we make it truly inclusive. And then we have to do the kinds of things that I was just sharing about building that statewide capacity. What are the issues that we really want to be looking at? We're kind of focusing ourselves within the My Healthy Climate Plan as a starting point to really have already identified the major ways that the state needs to move forward. But those will look different in each community. And again, each community has that local values and local knowledge that they're going to have to meet that plan. So we want to make sure we're developing the leaders and campaigns, what kind of services, the training, maybe talking about climate change, as I just showed you, but there might be other services that we can provide. And I'd be really curious to see your hopeful visions of what that success might look like in 1, 3, 5, 10, maybe even 20 years out. So I'll go back to the slides so you can see them all. But first I'll say just thank you again to the Climate Change Education Solutions Network for hosting this amazing conference. And thank all of you for out there listening to all of this and learning a little bit. Maybe you already knew us. Maybe this was your first time learning a little bit about the Michigan Climate Action Network. So here are my questions for you, and I'm happy to take any questions from anyone else.